Dog gives birth to the strangest puppy. What happens next will leave you speechless. What you're about to read isn't just another animal rescue story. This tale will chill you to your core and make you question everything you thought you knew about the natural world. Like and subscribe now, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The rain pounded against the windows of Mia's small office at the back of the animal shelter. Lightning flashed, illuminating stacks of unpaid bills and donation forms scattered across her desk. Running a small-town animal shelter was never easy, but tonight seemed particularly grim as the storm raged on. Mia rubbed her tired eyes. At 28, she'd already given 7 years of her life to this place, to the animals nobody else wanted. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her once white veterinary coat was stained with the day's work. The shelter was struggling financially, but she couldn't bring herself to turn away a single animal in need. The phone rang, cutting through the drum of rain. Mia glanced at the clock. 11:47 p.m. Nothing good ever came from calls this late. "Willow Creek Animal Shelter," she answered, trying to mask the exhaustion in her voice. "There's a dog," a man's voice crackled through static. "By the cliffs. She's pregnant. Looks ready to pop any minute. She's just wandering around in this storm, and I'm worried she'll fall." Mia's heart sank. "Where exactly by the cliffs?" "The old overlook, near Miller's Point." "I'd help, but I'm just passing through." My headlights caught her eyes. She looked scared. Mia thanked him and hung up. She dialed Jordan's number immediately. As her assistant and the only other full-time staff member at the shelter, Jordan had become more than a colleague over the years. He was the only person who understood what this place meant to her. "I need your help," she said when he answered. "Pregnant stray by the cliffs." 20 minutes later, they were driving through the worst storm Willow Creek had seen in years. Jordan gripped the dashboard as Mia navigated the shelter's old van through winding roads that led to the cliffs. Visibility was near zero, with rain sheeting down the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. "This is insane," Jordan said, pushing his glasses up his nose. "We should have called animal control." "They don't come out in storms like this," Mia replied, squinting through the windshield. "If we don't find her, no one will." The headlights caught something moving in the distance, a flash of amber in the darkness. Mia slowed the van. "There!" Jordan pointed. A thin dog stood at the edge of the road, her swollen belly hanging low. She was some kind of Labrador mix, her coat a dirty golden color, matted with mud and rain. As the van approached, she turned to look at them, and Mia felt a chill run down her spine. The dog's eyes were an unusual amber color, almost glowing in the headlights. There was something in those eyes, not just fear or pain, but a strange sort of awareness that made Mia's skin prickle. "She doesn't look like a stray," Jordan said as they stepped out into the rain. "No collar, but she's not completely malnourished." Mia approached slowly, speaking in soft tones. "Hey there, girl. It's okay. We're here to help." The dog watched her approach without moving, those amber eyes fixed on Mia's face. Then, shockingly, the dog took a step toward her, as if she'd been waiting for them. "That's weird," Jordan whispered. "It's like she knows us." As Mia reached out to slip a lead around the dog's neck, lightning split the sky. In that brief, blinding flash, Mia saw something on the cliff edge behind them. A tall, dark figure standing perfectly still, watching. When the darkness returned, she blinked away the afterimage, telling herself it was nothing but a tree or rock formation. The dog whined softly, a sound that made the hairs on Mia's neck stand up. It wasn't quite right, almost like a human trying to mimic a dog's whimper. "Let's get her in the van," Mia said, suddenly eager to leave this place. As they drove back toward the shelter, the pregnant dog lay quietly in the back, those strange amber eyes never leaving Mia's face in the rearview mirror. Jordan checked her for injuries, finding none. "No chip, no collar, not spayed obviously," he reported. "She seems healthy despite being out in this weather, definitely close to term." Another flash of lightning illuminated the road ahead, and in that instant, Mia swore she saw the same dark figure standing in the middle of the road. She slammed on the brakes, the van skidding on the wet asphalt. "What?" Jordan shouted, bracing himself against the dashboard. "What is it?" But there was nothing there, just rain and darkness. "I thought I saw—" Mia shook her head. "Nothing. just my eyes playing tricks. The dog in the back made that strange whimper again, but this time it almost sounded like words, like she was trying to tell them something. "Did you hear that?" Mia asked. Jordan looked at her strangely. "Hear what?" Mia didn't answer. She drove the rest of the way in silence, unable to shake the feeling that they weren't just rescuing a dog tonight. They were stepping into something much deeper, much darker than a simple animal rescue. At the shelter, Mia prepared a quiet kennel away from the other animals. The storm had knocked out the power, and they worked by flashlight and emergency lamps. The shadows seemed to move strangely in the corners of the room. "I'll call her Nova," Mia said, helping the dog settle onto soft blankets. "She reminds me of a star. Those eyes?" Jordan nodded, but he looked uneasy. "I'll stay tonight. She could go into labor any time." As if on cue, Nova began to pant heavily, her amber eyes fixed on Mia's face. Labor had begun. "Get the emergency kit," Mia instructed, kneeling beside Nova. "It's going to be a long night." Neither of them realized just how long, or how their lives would never be the same after what they were about to witness. The birthing area was bathed in the eerie glow of battery-powered lamps as the storm continued to rage outside. Mia and Jordan worked silently, efficiently, preparing towels and warm water for the impending birth. Nova's breathing had become more labored, her amber eyes still locked on Mia with that unsettling intelligence. "Something feels off about this whole situation," Jordan whispered, arranging medical supplies on a small metal table. "I've assisted with dozens of dog births, but this feels different." Mia nodded, unable to shake the growing sense of unease. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with an energy she couldn't explain. Outside, thunder crashed so loudly the windows rattled in their frames. "The contractions are getting closer," Mia said, stroking Nova's head gently. The dog leaned into her touch, but then suddenly tensed, her entire body going rigid. "Here we go," Jordan said, positioning himself at Nova's rear. "First puppy's coming." Nova's whimper cut through the air, but it wasn't a normal sound. It was almost like a whispered word, something just on the edge of comprehension. Mia and Jordan exchanged a quick, confused glance, but there was no time to dwell on it as Nova began to push. Minutes stretched into an hour. Something wasn't right. In normal canine labor, puppies came relatively quickly, one after another. "There should be more than one puppy," Jordan said, voicing Mia's thoughts. "Her size suggests a litter of at least 4 or 5. Nova strained again, the strange whisper-whimper filling the room, almost drowning out the sound of the storm. The emergency lights flickered, dimming briefly before brightening again. Then, finally, progress. "I can see it," Jordan announced, his voice tight with concentration. "Just one more push." Nova gave a final, tremendous effort, and the puppy emerged. Jordan caught it in a clean towel, ready to clear airways and stimulate breathing, as he'd done countless times before. But as he looked down at the bundle in his hands, his movement slowed, then stopped entirely. "Mia," he said, his voice barely audible. "Mia, you need to see this." She moved around to look, and her breath caught in her throat. The puppy wasn't what they expected, not even close. Instead of the pink or dark-colored newborn they anticipated, this puppy was covered in fur the color of silver smoke, shimmering almost metallically in the lamplight. More disturbing, its eyes were already open, something impossible for newborn puppies, whose eyes typically remain closed for up to 2 weeks after birth. And those eyes, they were a brilliant electric blue that seemed to glow from within, fixing on Mia with the same unnerving awareness as its mother's. "What is that?" Jordan whispered, his hands trembling slightly as he held the towel. The puppy didn't cry or whimper like normal newborns. It simply stared, unnaturally calm, its tiny chest rising and falling with even breaths. When Jordan attempted to clean it, the puppy stood on wobbly legs, another impossibility for a newborn, and shook itself, the silver fur settling perfectly into place. Nova watched calmly, showing none of the typical new mother behaviors of licking or nuzzling her baby. Instead, she seemed to be waiting for something. "Check for more puppies," Mia instructed, her voice strangely distant to her own ears. "There has to be more than one." Jordan carefully examined Nova, then shook his head. "Nothing. Just the one." The overhead lights flickered again, and in that moment of semi-darkness, Mia could have sworn the puppy grew slightly before her eyes. When the light steadied, she told herself it was just a trick of the shadows. "This isn't normal," Jordan said, stating the obvious. "I've never seen anything like this. We should call Dr. Benson." Mia nodded absently, unable to tear her gaze away from the puppy's glowing blue eyes. "Tomorrow. It's too late to call him now." As if understanding her words, the puppy tilted its head slightly, those eerie blue eyes blinking slowly. Outside, the storm seemed to intensify, rain hammering against the roof with renewed fury. "We should at least take some pictures, document this," Jordan suggested, reaching for his phone. But when he aimed the camera at the puppy, the screen went black. He frowned, tapping at it. Battery was at 80% just a minute ago. Mia reached for her own phone, only to find it dead as well. Even the shelter's emergency landline emitted nothing but static when she lifted the receiver. Nova suddenly stood, moving to stand protectively over her unusual offspring. She let out a low growl that made both humans step back instinctively. "Let's give them some space," Mia suggested, though she couldn't take her eyes off the silver puppy. "We'll check on them throughout the night." As they stepped out of the birthing area, Mia glanced back one last time. In the doorway's shadow, she could have sworn she saw Nova and her puppy exchange a look of perfect understanding, like two intelligent beings communicating silently in a language humans couldn't comprehend. Morning arrived with surprising calm after the night's violent storm. Sunlight streamed through the shelter windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the golden beams. Mia had managed only a few hours of restless sleep on the break room couch, her dreams filled with strange shadows and glowing eyes. She made her way to Nova's kennel, coffee in hand, trying to convince herself that the previous night's oddities were simply the product of exhaustion and poor lighting. Maybe the puppy would look normal in daylight, just an unusual coat color, nothing more. The thought evaporated the moment she reached the kennel. Nova lay curled in her bed, watching attentively as her silver puppy explored the small space. But that was impossible. Newborn puppies couldn't walk for at least 2 weeks, let alone explore with purpose. Yet, here was this one, not even 12 hours old, moving with the coordination of a much older dog. Its movements were unnaturally fluid, almost graceful, as it investigated every corner of the kennel. "This can't be happening," Mia whispered to herself. At the sound of her voice, the puppy turned, those brilliant blue eyes locking onto hers with unmistakable recognition. It approached the kennel door, its silver coat catching the sunlight and reflecting it in ways that fur simply shouldn't. Jordan appeared beside her, dark circles under his eyes, indicating he'd slept as poorly as she had. "Tell me I'm not crazy," he said quietly. "Tell me you're seeing what I'm seeing." Mia nodded slowly. "It's walking, actually, more like prowling." "I checked the security cameras this morning," Jordan continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper despite the fact that they were alone. "There's something wrong with the footage." "What do you mean wrong?" "It glitched out for about 3 hours last night. When it came back online," he trailed off, pulling out his tablet to show her. The grainy night vision footage showed Nova and her puppy in the kennel. The puppy wasn't sleeping as it should have been. Instead, it sat perfectly upright, its glowing eyes visible even on the poor quality footage, tracking something moving across the room. But there was nothing there, just empty space. "Keep watching," Jordan instructed. On screen, Nova suddenly stood at attention, her posture rigid as she stared at the kennel door. Then both dogs turned their heads in perfect unison, following the movement of something invisible, their eyes tracking it from one side of the kennel to the other. A chill ran down Mia's spine. "Could be a bug on the lens or something," she suggested weakly. Jordan gave her a skeptical look. "A bug that both dogs can see through the camera?" Before she could respond, the shelter's front door chimed. Dr. Benson, the local veterinarian who consulted for the shelter, entered carrying his medical bag. "Jordan called me first thing," he explained, noticing Mia's surprised expression. "Said you had an unusual birth last night. Single puppy with some abnormalities?" Mia led him to Nova's kennel, where the silver puppy now sat perfectly still, watching their approach. Dr. Benson paused, his usually professional demeanor faltering as he took in the scene. "That's not right," he muttered, adjusting his glasses as if the problem was with his vision. "Can you examine it?" Mia asked. "We need to figure out what we're dealing with." Dr. Benson hesitated, then nodded. As they prepared to enter the kennel, Mia noticed something else strange. Shadow, the shelter's resident cat, had appeared and was sitting nearby, watching the kennel. Unlike his usual territorial behavior around dogs, Shadow's posture was different, almost submissive, his head slightly bowed as he stared at the silver puppy. Shadow never comes to this part of the shelter, Jordan noted, following Mia's gaze. When they opened the kennel door, Nova immediately positioned herself between them and her puppy, a low growl emanating from deep in her throat. It was the aggressive protection Mia had expected to see the night before, but had been strangely absent. "Easy, girl," Dr. Benson said soothingly, moving slowly as he entered the space. The silver puppy watched from behind its mother, those intelligent blue eyes assessing each human in turn. When its gaze landed on Dr. Benson, the veterinarian froze mid-step. "My God," he whispered. "It's like it's thinking." Jordan hung back at the kennel door, his tablet in hand. "I've been doing some research," he said, his voice uncertain. "There are old stories about dogs like this. They call them omen dogs, born once every century, harbingers of change." Dr. Benson shot him an irritated look. "This is a medical situation, not a folklore convention." But as he attempted to approach the puppy for examination, Nova's growl deepened, and the air in the kennel seemed to grow suddenly colder. The silver puppy still hadn't made a sound, not a whimper, not a bark, but its eyes glowed more intensely as it watched them. The lights in the shelter flickered, despite the clear sky outside. Dr. Benson backed away slowly, his scientific skepticism visibly shaken by Nova's threatening stance and the strange atmosphere in the kennel. The lights stabilized, but the unnatural chill lingered in the air around them. "Let's try a different approach," the veterinarian suggested, reaching into his bag for treats. "Maybe we can gain her trust." Nova's amber eyes tracked his every movement. When he offered a treat through the kennel bars, she remained motionless, neither accepting nor rejecting it. The silver puppy watched this interaction with an eerie stillness, its blue eyes unnaturally focused for an animal that should be blind and helpless at this age. "I've never seen maternal behavior quite like this," Dr. Benson admitted, withdrawing his hand. "Usually new mothers are protective but not outright hostile, especially toward familiar humans." Mia nodded. "She's been strange since we found her. It's like she knows something we don't." With careful movements, Dr. Benson set up a small camera on a tripod outside the kennel. "Since we can't examine the pup directly, let's monitor them. I'll review the footage later, see if we can spot any abnormalities in their behavior." As they retreated to Mia's office to give Nova space, Jordan continued scrolling through websites on his tablet. "Listen to this," he said, reading from the screen. "In certain cultures, there are legends of spirit dogs, born with unusual coloring and capabilities beyond normal canines. These rare animals were considered messengers between worlds, appearing only in times of great change or danger." Dr. Benson rolled his eyes. "That's superstitious nonsense. There's obviously a medical explanation, perhaps a rare genetic mutation or developmental abnormality." "Then explain how it's walking already," Jordan challenged, "or why its eyes were open at birth." "Premature development isn't unheard of," Dr. Benson replied, though his tone lacked conviction. Mia interrupted their debate. "Whatever's happening, we need to figure out next steps. The shelter can barely keep the lights on for our regular animals, let alone deal with whatever this is." "I can run some tests if you can get fur or saliva samples," Dr. Benson offered. "Maybe reach out to some colleagues at the university." Their conversation was cut short by a high-pitched electronic squeal from the security monitors. Mia rushed to check the screens, finding most of them displaying only static. The camera that should have shown Nova's kennel flickered between static and clear image, as if struggling against some interference. In the brief moments when the image cleared, they could see Nova standing perfectly still, staring directly at the camera as if she knew they were watching. The silver puppy was nowhere in sight. "Where did it go?" Jordan asked, tension evident in his voice. They hurried back to the kennel, finding Nova still in the same position, but now the silver puppy sat beside her, gazing up at the humans with those penetrating blue eyes. It had definitely moved, but the camera hadn't captured it. "I want a DNA sample," Dr. Benson said firmly. "That might give us some answers." With careful preparation, including protective gloves and a mild sedative for Nova, they managed to enter the kennel. Dr. Benson worked quickly, swabbing the inside of Nova's cheek and attempting to do the same for the puppy. But when he approached the silver pup, something extraordinary happened. The temperature plummeted further, their breath suddenly visible in the cold air. The puppy didn't growl or bare its teeth. It simply stared at Dr. Benson, those blue eyes glowing brighter, and the veterinarian's hand froze mid-air, trembling slightly. I can't, he stammered, his face suddenly pale. Something's wrong. I can't move my arm. Jordan and Mia watched in shock as Dr. Benson struggled, his extended arm rigid as if held by invisible restraints. After several tense seconds, he gasped and stumbled backward, nearly falling as whatever force had held him released its grip. "What just happened?" Mia demanded, helping steady the shaken veterinarian. Dr. Benson shook his head, sweat beading on his forehead despite the unnatural cold. "I don't know. It felt like something was in my head, telling me to stop." They retreated from the kennel, locking it securely behind them. In the hallway, Dr. Benson examined his arm, finding no marks or physical explanation for the paralysis he'd experienced. "I need to get this sample analyzed," he said, holding up Nova's swab with a shaking hand, "and maybe consult with someone who specializes in unusual cases." As they walked back toward Mia's office, the lights throughout the shelter flickered again, this time in a distinct pattern that couldn't be dismissed as random electrical issues. Behind them, Shadow the cat had returned to his position near Nova's kennel, sitting in that same submissive posture, watching the silver puppy through the bars with an attention that bordered on reverence. "I don't think this is a medical issue anymore," Jordan whispered, voicing what they were all beginning to suspect. "This is something else entirely." That night, the shelter felt different, quieter somehow, as if the usual sounds of animals had been muted by an invisible presence. Mia had sent Jordan home to rest, promising to call if anything changed with Nova or her unusual puppy. Dr. Benson had left as well, taking Nova's DNA sample with him and looking visibly shaken by his encounter. Alone in her office, Mia tried to focus on paperwork, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the silver puppy with those knowing eyes. She'd decided to name it Soul, partly because its fur reminded her of sunlight reflecting off silver, and partly because it seemed to need a name that carried some weight, some significance. The shelter's nightlights cast long shadows across the floor as Mia made her final rounds, checking on each animal before settling in for another night on the break room couch. She saved Nova's kennel for last, steeling herself for whatever strangeness might await her. As she approached, Nova began to growl, not at Mia, but at something outside. The dog stood rigid, her amber eyes fixed on the window beside her kennel, hackles raised in warning. Mia followed her gaze but saw only darkness. Then movement caught her eye, a shadow shifting against the blackness of night. Instinctively, Mia moved to the security monitoring station, flipping through camera feeds until she found the exterior view that showed the area outside Nova's window. What she saw made her blood run cold. A tall figure stood motionless by the perimeter fence, wrapped in what appeared to be a long, dark cloak despite the warm summer night. The security light illuminated them just enough to reveal a face hidden deep within a hood, features indistinguishable in the shadows. The figure was completely still, staring directly at Nova's window. As Mia watched, frozen with uncertainty, the figure raised one hand slowly toward the shelter. Without thinking, Mia grabbed a flashlight and rushed toward the shelter's side door, driven by a mixture of fear and protective instinct. She burst outside, sweeping the beam across the fence line where the figure had stood. But there was nothing there. No footprints in the soft earth, no disturbance in the gravel path. The intruder had vanished, as if they'd never been there at all. Back inside, Mia hurried to Nova's kennel, heart pounding in her chest. What she found stopped her in her tracks. Soul stood at the kennel bars, tiny paws pressed against the metal, its glowing blue eyes fixed on the exact spot where the cloaked figure had been standing. Nova had positioned herself protectively behind her puppy, watching with those intelligent amber eyes. "What are you?" Mia whispered, the question directed at both dogs, though she expected no answer. Soul turned its gaze to her, and for a brief, unsettling moment, Mia could have sworn she felt something brush against her mind. A presence, alien yet somehow familiar, trying to communicate without words. The moment passed, leaving Mia dizzy and disoriented. She steadied herself against the wall, trying to make sense of what had just happened. A gust of cold air rushed past her, though all the windows were closed. The temperature in the shelter had dropped suddenly, drastically, making her shiver despite the warm summer night outside. Mia retreated to the security station, rewinding the footage to capture evidence of the cloaked figure, but the recording showed only static during the exact minutes when the intruder had been present. When the image cleared, the fence line was empty. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Benson? Something's wrong with Nova's DNA sample. Lab equipment malfunctioned. Results came back unreadable. Coming back tomorrow with specialized equipment. Mia stared at the message, a sense of dread settling over her. Whatever was happening went beyond strange puppy behavior or coincidental equipment failures. There was something deliberate about it all, something that felt almost orchestrated. She returned to Nova's kennel, maintaining a safe distance as she observed mother and pup. Sewell had finally settled down to sleep, curled against Nova's side, looking deceptively normal in repose. But even in sleep, there was something off about its breathing, too measured, too controlled for a newborn animal. "I'll figure this out," Mia promised quietly, though she wasn't sure if she was speaking to the dogs or to herself. As she turned to leave, the overhead lights flickered once more. In the momentary darkness, she felt, rather than saw, something move past her. A shift in the air, a presence brushing by. When the light steadied, she was alone in the hallway, but the distinct impression of being watched lingered. Whatever Sewell was, whatever Nova had brought into their lives that stormy night, Mia was becoming increasingly certain it wasn't just an unusual puppy. It was something else entirely. Something that had been waiting to be found. Morning arrived with unwelcome clarity, sunlight streaming through the shelter windows and erasing the shadows that had made the previous night's events seem almost dreamlike. Mia had barely slept, spending most of the night watching Nova and Sewell through the security monitors, searching for anything that might explain what was happening. What she witnessed defied explanation. Sewell wasn't just developing at an accelerated rate. The puppy was doing things that should have been impossible. During the night, Mia had watched in disbelief as Sewell stood on its hind legs for nearly a minute, examining the kennel lock with an almost human curiosity. Later, when she brought food for Nova, the silver puppy had tracked her movements with a calculated precision that made her skin crawl. "This is beyond unusual," Dr. Benson said when he arrived that morning, setting up more sophisticated equipment beside Nova's kennel. "I've consulted with colleagues at the university. None of them have heard of canine development this advanced, this quickly." Jordan stood nearby, dark circles under his eyes, suggesting he'd slept as poorly as Mia. "It's only been 2 days," he said quietly. "Look at the size difference." He was right. Sewell had nearly doubled in size since birth, now resembling a 2-week-old puppy, despite being just 48 hours old. The silver fur had grown thicker, more lustrous, almost metallic in the morning light. "I've set up specialized cameras," Dr. Benson explained, pointing to small devices placed strategically around the kennel. "They'll record across multiple spectrums, infrared, ultraviolet, the works. If there's something unusual about this puppy's physiology, we'll find it." Mia nodded absently, her attention fixed on Sewell. The puppy was watching them intently, those eerie blue eyes tracking their every movement. When Dr. Benson approached the kennel with a tranquilizer gun, intended for Nova, to allow for a safer examination of Sewell, the puppy did something that sent a chill down Mia's spine. It shook its head, once, deliberately. A clear no gesture. Dr. Benson froze, the tranquilizer gun halfway raised. "Did you see that?" he whispered. Before anyone could respond, the kennel door swung open, despite the secure lock Mia had personally checked less than an hour ago. Nova remained inside, but Sewell walked out calmly, those luminous eyes fixed on the humans. No one moved, too shocked by what they were witnessing. Sewell sat directly in front of Dr. Benson, looking up at the tranquilizer gun, then back at the veterinarian's face. The message was unmistakable. That wouldn't be necessary. "This isn't possible, Doctor." Benson breathed, lowering the gun slowly. "Dogs don't understand complex tools. They don't open locked doors." Sewell turned away from him, approaching Mia with deliberate steps. Despite her fear, she knelt down, drawn by an inexplicable compulsion to meet the puppy at eye level. "What are you?" she whispered, echoing her question from the night before. Sewell didn't respond, of course, but something happened when their eyes met. A flash of something passed through Mia's mind. Not words exactly, but impressions. Danger, protection, urgency. Then it was gone, leaving her gasping for breath. Mia? Jordan was at her side instantly, concern etched across his features. What happened? She shook her head, unable to articulate the experience. It's trying to tell us something. Dr. Benson looked skeptical, but before he could speak, his phone rang. The call was brief, his expression growing more troubled with each passing second. That was the university lab, he said after hanging up. The equipment failures weren't coincidental. The DNA sample I brought in, it somehow corrupted their entire system. Data from completely unrelated projects was altered or erased. They're saying it's like the sample infected the network. Jordan's tablet pinged with an alert. He checked it, his face paling. Someone just sent this to the shelter's email. No sender address, no metadata. He turned the screen to show them. It displayed a single image, ancient-looking script in a language none of them recognized, covering most of the page. At the bottom, in modern English, was a single line. Keep him hidden. They are coming. As if responding to these words, Sewell returned to the kennel, nudging the door closed behind him with a precision that no puppy should possess. Nova nuzzled her offspring, those amber eyes now fixed on the humans with unmistakable warning. The sound of a car pulling into the shelter's parking lot drew their attention. Through the window, they saw a sleek black SUV with tinted windows and no license plates. Were we expecting anyone? Jordan asked, his voice tight with anxiety. Mia shook her head slowly. Number, no one knows about Sewell except us. But someone clearly did, and they had arrived. The black SUV gleamed in the morning sunlight, its tinted windows revealing nothing of the occupants within. Mia, Jordan, and Dr. Benson exchanged uneasy glances as they moved toward the front of the shelter, instinctively positioning themselves between the entrance and the kennel area where Sewell remained. Maybe it's just a potential adopter, Jordan suggested, though his tone made it clear he didn't believe it. The vehicle's door opened smoothly, and a man stepped out. He was tall and thin, dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that seemed out of place in their small town. His silver hair was neatly combed back, revealing a face that was handsome in a cold, angular way. Dark sunglasses concealed his eyes, even as he approached the entrance with confident strides. Smile, Mia whispered to the others. Act normal. The shelter door chimed as the man entered, bringing with him the subtle scent of expensive cologne. He removed his sunglasses, revealing eyes so dark they appeared almost black, scanning the reception area with clinical precision before settling on Mia. Ms. Chen, he said, his voice cultured and smooth. Not a question. He already knew who she was. My name is Professor Larkin. I'm with the Blackwood Institute for Genetic Research. He extended a hand, which Mia shook reluctantly. His skin was cool and dry against hers. What can we do for you, Professor? She asked, maintaining a calm she didn't feel. Larkin smiled, a practiced expression that didn't reach his eyes. I apologize for arriving unannounced. We received some rather unusual data fluctuations from the university laboratory yesterday evening. Fluctuations that coincided with a DNA sample from this facility. Dr. Benson stepped forward, professional curiosity momentarily overriding his concern. You tracked a data anomaly to our shelter? How is that even possible? The Blackwood Institute specializes in genetic anomalies, Doctor, Larkin replied, acknowledging Doctor. Benson with a slight nod. Particularly those that manifest unexpected qualities. The sample you submitted triggered several of our monitoring algorithms. Mia felt a chill run down her spine. The mysterious email had warned them to keep Saul hidden, and now this man had appeared, somehow tracking them through nothing more than a DNA sample. I'm afraid there's been some misunderstanding, she said carefully. We have nothing unusual here, just ordinary shelter animals waiting for adoption. Larkin's smile remained fixed, but something flickered in those dark eyes. Amusement, perhaps, or condescension. Ms. Chen, I understand your caution, but I believe you recently took in a pregnant Labrador mix, which has since given birth to a single puppy with rather extraordinary characteristics. The three shelter workers remained silent, shock evident on their faces. Larkin continued, his tone conversational despite the impossible knowledge he possessed. Silver fur that almost seems to change shade depending on the light, eyes that were open at birth, an unusual blue color, accelerated development, perhaps even some cognitive anomalies. "How could you possibly know all that?" Jordan blurted, earning a warning glance from Mia. Larkin turned to him, that cold smile never wavering. "The Blackwood Institute has been tracking these genetic signatures for decades. They appear very rarely, once every generation or so. When Dr. Benson's sample corrupted the university's systems, it created a distinctive pattern we've seen before." He reached into his jacket, producing a sleek tablet. On it was an image that made Mia's heart skip a beat. A photograph of another dog, strikingly similar to Saul, but fully grown. The same silver fur, the same penetrating blue eyes. This specimen was documented in 1923 in a remote village in northern Europe, Larkin explained. There have been others throughout history. Always a single birth, always with accelerated development and unusual cognitive abilities. Dr. Benson leaned forward, professional fascination temporarily overriding his suspicion. "What exactly are they?" "That," Larkin said, putting away the tablet, "is what we hope to discover. The Blackwood Institute is prepared to offer your shelter a substantial donation in exchange for the puppy, $200,000. More than enough to keep this place operational for several years, I imagine." Mia's eyes widened at the figure, her mind racing. The shelter was indeed struggling financially, and that kind of money would secure its future. But something about Larkin's interest in Soul felt wrong, predatory. "The puppy isn't up for adoption yet," she said finally. "It's still nursing, too young to be separated from its mother." Larkin's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "We would take the mother as well, of course. Both would receive the highest standard of care at our facility." "I'm sorry, but they're not available," Mia stated firmly. "Not at any price." The professor studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Then he nodded, replacing his sunglasses. "I understand. Here's my card. Should you reconsider?" He placed a pristine business card on the counter, then turned to leave. At the door, he paused, looking back at them. "Ms. Chen," he said softly, "you don't know what you're protecting." The door closed behind him with a gentle chime that somehow sounded ominous in the suddenly silent reception area. They watched through the window as Larkin returned to the black SUV, which pulled away with eerie smoothness. For several moments after it disappeared from view, no one spoke, the weight of the encounter hanging heavily in the air. "That was disturbing," Jordan finally said, breaking the silence. Dr. Benson nodded, his scientific skepticism visibly shaken. How did he know so much? The DNA sample couldn't possibly have provided that level of detail. Mia's attention had already shifted to the more immediate concerns. "We need to move Nova and Soul. That man isn't going to take no for an answer." "Move them where?" Jordan asked. "The shelter is the safest place for them." "Not anymore," Mia replied grimly. "If Larkin found us once, he'll do it again. And next time, he might not be so polite." They spent the afternoon making preparations, transferring other shelter animals to the main kennel area, while converting a storage room at the back of the building into a more secure space for Nova and Soul. Dr. Benson reluctantly agreed to help, though his scientific curiosity was clearly battling with his growing unease about the situation. "I should get back to my practice," he said as evening approached. "But I want you both to be extremely careful. Whatever Larkin's interest in this puppy, it's not benevolent research." After he left, Mia and Jordan took turns monitoring the shelter's perimeter, checking security cameras and reinforcing doors. The strange email's warning, "They are coming," echoed in Mia's mind as she worked. Whoever they were, Larkin was clearly just the beginning. Night fell, bringing with it a strange stillness. Mia had insisted Jordan go home to rest while she took the first watch, promising to call at the first sign of trouble. Alone in the darkened shelter, she checked on Nova and Soul one last time before settling into the makeshift monitoring station they'd set up. The silver puppy had grown even more since morning, now resembling a month-old dog despite being only days old. More disturbing than its growth was its behavior. Soul had arranged a series of dog toys in a precise pattern on the floor, forming what appeared to be a protective circle around Nova's sleeping form. "What are you?" Mia whispered, not for the first time. Sewell's blue eyes met hers through the viewing window, and again she felt that strange brush against her mind, more distinct now, almost like words forming just beyond the edge of hearing. A sudden crash from the front of the shelter jolted her from the moment. The security monitors showed multiple dark figures moving with military precision through the reception area. They wore black tactical gear, faces obscured by masks, weapons held at the ready. Panic surged through Mia as she realized what was happening. Larkin hadn't waited after all. She fumbled for her phone to call Jordan, but the screen showed no signal. They'd jammed communications. Heart pounding, she rushed to Nova and Saul's room, flinging the door open without thinking of her own safety. "We have to go," she hissed urgently. "Now!" To her shock, Nova was already on her feet, alert and waiting, as if she'd known this moment was coming. Sewell stood beside her, those eerie blue eyes glowing brighter than ever in the dimness. Mia could hear footsteps approaching, harsh whispers as the intruders methodically searched the building. There was no time for hesitation. She grabbed a leash for Nova, but the dog was already moving toward the shelter's rarely used back door, Sewell at her heels. They slipped out into the night, just as flashlight beams cut through the darkness behind them. The cool evening air carried the sounds of the intruders discovering their absence. Angry voices, sharp commands to spread out and search the perimeter. "This way," Mia whispered, guiding Nova and Sewell toward the dense woods that bordered the shelter property. Her mind raced, trying to formulate a plan. They needed to find Jordan, to warn him, but without a working phone. A shout from behind confirmed they'd been spotted. Flashlight beams swept the ground, searching for their trail. Mia broke into a run, Nova keeping pace beside her with unnatural awareness. Sewell moving with impossible speed for a puppy. The woods closed around them, branches whipping past as they fled deeper into the darkness. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew, crashing footsteps, the crackle of radios, the unmistakable mechanical sound of weapons being readied. Nova suddenly veered left, pulling Mia in a new direction. Though every instinct told her to question this, something deeper made her trust the dog's guidance. Sewell had taken the lead now, those glowing eyes somehow illuminating a path through the undergrowth that Mia would never have found on her own. The sounds of pursuit began to fade as they wove through the forest in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, as if the dogs were consciously trying to lose their trackers. When they finally paused in a small clearing, Mia realized with astonishment that she had no idea where they were. The woods near the shelter had never seemed this vast or dense before. Nova stood perfectly still, her head raised, amber eyes scanning the darkness. Then she did something that sent chills down Mia's spine. She opened her mouth and released a howl unlike anything Mia had ever heard. It wasn't the sound of a dog at all, but something deeper, more resonant, almost like the harmonics of multiple voices layered together. The howl hung in the air, vibrating with an energy that made the hairs on Mia's arms stand on end. In the eerie silence that followed, even the forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Then, impossibly, Sewell sat down calmly, lifted his small head toward the night sky, and responded with a howl of his own. Despite coming from such a small body, Sewell's howl penetrated the darkness with unnatural power, echoing through the trees and seeming to ripple the very air around them. It wasn't the clumsy yip of a puppy. It was ancient, primal, carrying harmonics that no canine throat should have been able to produce. More shocking still was what happened next. Somewhere in the distance, something answered. The responding call was neither animal nor human. A sound that existed somewhere in between worlds, reverberating through the forest like the echo of a forgotten language. Mia stood frozen, her mind struggling to process what her ears were telling her. "This isn't happening," she whispered to herself, but the evidence was undeniable. Nova nudged her leg, urging her to move. With trembling legs, Mia followed as the dogs led her deeper into the woods, toward the source of that impossible response. The sounds of pursuit had faded entirely now, as if the searchers were being kept at bay by some unseen force. They walked for what seemed like hours, though Mia's watch insisted it had been less than 30 minutes. The forest around them grew older, the trees more massive and gnarled, moss-covered trunks stretching toward a sky now partially visible through the canopy. Moonlight filtered down in silver shafts, illuminating their path in ways that seemed almost deliberate. "Where are we?" Mia asked aloud, though she expected no answer. This part of the forest felt different. older, watchful, as if the trees themselves were aware of their passing. A clearing appeared ahead, bathed in moonlight that seemed unnaturally bright. In its center stood a small cabin, weathered by decades of exposure, yet somehow not decrepit. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, and warm light glowed behind curtained windows. Nova approached without hesitation, Sewell at her side. Before they reached the door, it swung open, revealing an elderly man with a wild mane of white hair and a beard that reached almost to his waist. He leaned on a gnarled wooden staff, his weather-beaten face creased with age, yet his eyes were sharp and clear as they fixed on the strange procession approaching his home. "You're late," the old man said simply, as if he'd been expecting them all along. "I thought you might not make it." Mia stared in disbelief. "Who are you? How did we—" "This part of the forest shouldn't even exist. We're miles from any habitation." The old man's eyes crinkled with something that might have been amusement. "I'm Elias," he said, stepping aside to invite them in. "And distance is a relative thing in these woods, especially on nights like this." Inside, the cabin was larger than it appeared from outside. A single room with a stone fireplace, shelves crammed with books and strange objects, dried herbs hanging from the rafters. It smelled of wood smoke, tea, and something else Mia couldn't identify, ancient and foreign. "You've brought the soul hound," Elias said, kneeling despite his apparent age to look Sewell directly in the eyes. The puppy met his gaze without fear, those blue eyes glowing in response to the old man's scrutiny. "Soul hound," Mia repeated, the words stirring something in her memory. "Is that what he is?" Elias nodded, rising slowly to his feet. "Born once every century, when the barriers between worlds grow thin. Guardians of the threshold, protectors of the balance." He gestured to Nova. "And she is his harbinger, chosen to carry him into this world when the time was right." "This is insane," Mia said, though her conviction was weakening with each impossible thing she witnessed. "I don't understand any of this." "Understanding isn't required," Elias replied, moving to a cluttered table where an ancient book lay open. "Only belief, and you already believe, or you wouldn't be here." He was right, Mia realized with a jolt. Despite everything she knew about the natural world, despite the impossibility of what was happening, some part of her had accepted the truth of Sewell's nature from the moment she'd first seen those knowing blue eyes. "The ones who hunt him? They're called seekers," Elias continued, his finger tracing lines of text in the open book. "They've pursued the soul hounds for generations, trying to capture their power for their own purposes." "Larkin," Mia whispered, "the man in the suit." Elias nodded grimly. "A servant of older, darker forces. If Sewell falls into their hands, it could tip the balance between worlds, allowing things that should remain separate to bleed together." Outside, a twig snapped in the darkness. Nova's head jerked up, her amber eyes fixed on the window. Sewell moved to stand beside her, his small body suddenly seeming to contain a much larger presence. "They've found us," Elias said quietly. "Sooner than I expected. The barriers must be weaker than I feared." Elias moved with surprising agility for his age, gathering strange objects from the shelves. A small pouch of powder, a crystal that glowed faintly blue, a twisted piece of metal that looked ancient and foreign. Nova stood guard at the window, her hackles raised, while Sewell remained unusually calm, his glowing eyes fixed on the door, as if waiting for something inevitable. "We can't fight them," Mia said, peering through the curtains at the dark shapes moving through the trees toward the cabin. "There are too many." "Fighting isn't the goal," Elias replied, placing the objects in a circle on the floor. "Protection is." He gestured for Mia to join him in the center of the room, Nova and Sewell already moving to position themselves within the circle he'd created. Outside, the sounds of approach grew louder, methodical footsteps, the metallic click of weapons being readied, hushed commands. "The Seekers aren't entirely human anymore," Elias explained, his voice low and urgent. "They've sacrificed pieces of themselves for power, for longevity, for the ability to sense the soul hounds across great distances. But their greatest strength is also their weakness. They're bound to their purpose, unable to see beyond it." "And what is their purpose?" Mia asked, her heart pounding as shadows passed across the windows. "To capture the power between worlds for themselves," Elias said. "To control what was never meant to be controlled." A sharp knock at the door silenced them. In the sudden quiet, Larkin's smooth voice called out, "Ms. Chen, I know you're in there. There's nowhere left to run. Please be reasonable. Bring the animal out, and no one needs to get hurt." Mia looked to Elias, who shook his head slightly. "Lies," he mouthed silently. "What do we do?" she whispered. Before the old man could answer, Sewell stepped forward, moving to the center of the circle they had formed. Though still small, a puppy of only a few days, albeit one growing at an impossible rate, he suddenly seemed larger somehow, his presence filling the room. His silver fur began to shimmer, not reflecting light, but generating it from within, casting strange patterns across the walls of the cabin. "What's happening?" Mia gasped. Elias smiled, a look of wonder and sadness crossing his weathered face. "He's making his choice. Each soul hound must decide, hide from its power or embrace it fully." Outside, the door handle turned, wood creaking under pressure as someone tried to force entry. Nova moved to stand protectively beside Sewell, her amber eyes now glowing with the same inner light as her offspring. "Last chance, Ms. Chen," Larkin called, his voice hardening. "Surrender the animal now." The door burst open, splinters of wood flying as armed figures flooded into the cabin. Larkin stood behind them, his perfect composure finally cracking as he stared at Sewell with a naked hunger in his eyes. "Secure the specimen," he ordered, gesturing toward the glowing puppy. But as the armed seekers advanced, something extraordinary happened. The air around Sewell began to distort, bending and rippling like heat waves over summer asphalt. His small form seemed to expand and contract simultaneously, as if existing in multiple places at once. The blue light emanating from his fur intensified, so bright it was almost painful to look at directly. "No!" Larkin shouted, recognizing what was happening. "Stop him!" One of the seekers raised his weapon, but froze mid-motion as Sewell's gaze fell upon him. Around the room, each armed figure stood paralyzed, caught in the same invisible force that had affected Dr. Benson days earlier, but magnified 100-fold. Larkin alone seemed able to move, taking a desperate step forward. "You don't understand what you're doing," he said, his voice cracking with emotion for the first time. "We need his power. The barriers are failing. We can use him to strengthen them, to save both worlds." "Lies," Elias said aloud this time. "You would tear down the walls between realms to feed your own hunger for power." Sewell's form continued to shift and blur, the air around him rippling more violently. Nova stood beside him, unaffected by the strange energies swirling through the cabin. She looked at Mia one last time, those amber eyes conveying something like gratitude, or perhaps farewell. Then Sewell released a final howl, the sound transcending mere noise to become something physical, a wave of pure energy that expanded outward from his small form. As it touched each seeker, they simply vanished. Not violently, not with any sign of pain or destruction. They simply ceased to be, as if they'd been gently erased from reality. Larkin screamed, a sound of rage and despair, as he too began to fade, becoming transparent at the edges. "You've doomed us all," he cried, his voice already distant. "Without control, the barriers will—" His words cut off as he disappeared entirely, leaving only Mia, Elias, Nova, and Sewell in the suddenly quiet cabin. The distortion around Sewell gradually settled, the intense light fading to a gentle glow. He looked up at Mia, those knowing blue eyes meeting hers one final time, and she felt that now familiar brush against her mind, but clearer now, almost like words. "Thank you for protecting me until I was ready." "Ready for what?" Mia asked aloud. Elias answered for him. "To take his place as guardian. The soul hounds don't just exist in our world. They stand between worlds, maintaining the balance that keeps reality intact. Without them, the boundaries would eventually collapse." Sewell padded to the open doorway, Nova at his side. Outside, the forest had changed. The moonlight now illuminated a path that hadn't been there before, leading into mists that shimmered with unnatural colors. "Will I ever see him again?" Mia asked, surprising herself with how much she cared about the answer. Elias placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Perhaps. The soul hounds move between worlds, but they never truly leave any of them behind. He'll watch over you, in his way." Sewell turned back one last time, those brilliant blue eyes meeting Mia's gaze. In that moment, she understood what she'd been part of. Not just a strange encounter with an unusual puppy, but a glimpse into something ancient and profound, a reminder that the world was larger and more mysterious than humans could comprehend. The silver puppy and his mother stepped onto the moonlit path, their forms gradually becoming translucent as they walked into the mist. Before they disappeared entirely, Sewell paused, looking back at the human who had protected him when he was vulnerable. The air around him shimmered once more, and Mia felt a final touch against her mind. Not words this time, but a feeling of peace, of gratitude, and of promise. Then they were gone, the misty path fading behind them, until only the ordinary forest remained, bathed in ordinary moonlight. "What happens now?" Mia asked softly. Elias smiled, looking younger somehow, as if a great burden had been lifted from him. "Now, you go back to your shelter, to your animals. You live your life knowing there are guardians in the shadows, protecting the boundaries between worlds. And no one will believe me if I tell them," Mia said, not a question, but a statement. "Some will," Elias replied. "Those who need to. The story will find its way to the right ears." As dawn broke over the forest, Mia found herself standing at the edge of the woods near the shelter. Elias and his cabin were gone, perhaps never truly there in the form she'd perceived. The shelter stood quiet and undisturbed, as if the previous night's invasion had never happened. Only a single silver hair on her sleeve remained as evidence of her encounter with Sewell, catching the morning light with an iridescence that no ordinary fur could possess. Inside, she found Jordan asleep at the monitoring station, unaware of all that had transpired. On the security cameras, the kennel that had housed Nova and Sewell appeared empty to casual observation. But occasionally, when the light hit it just right, Mia could see the faintest shimmer in the air, like a window briefly opening to somewhere else. In those moments, she would sometimes glimpse a silver puppy watching her with knowing blue eyes, no longer just a strange birth in a small-town animal shelter, but a guardian of the threshold between worlds, a protector of realities that most humans would never know existed. And in the darkest nights, when the barriers between worlds grew thin, those who listened carefully might hear an impossible howl echoing through the veil, the voice of the soul hound, standing guard at the edge of reality, ensuring that what should remain separate stayed that way, until the next century, when another would be born and the cycle would begin.